Well, you've had a whole week to think about what you wanted to talk about now, so
Yeah,
lay it on me.
I did have a question. Oh gosh, eunuch. Why is that book not in the Bible?
Which one?
Is it eunuch? Steve and I was talking about that. He was doing his Bible study, and it was talking about the book of eunuch, and said it's not in our Bible. It's would of course be he's talked about in the Old Testament, and
It may be in the Apocrypha.
So please, I'm not sure what you said.
Eunuch, and so that was, it's in some Bibles, and I'm not sure what Bibles it's actually in. Maybe it's in but he said there was a couple of them that were actually not in the Bible, and so I just wanted to kind of ask and get your thoughts on that.
I'm looking that up. I want to get a list and see if it's where I think it is.
Because he was talking about eunuch. That was on Sunday a little bit.
Oh, that's not it. Stand by. Stand by.
Okay. I know I threw you a curveball.
No, that's okay. I'm looking at the books of Apocrypha now, and I don't see that. Can you spell it? Because I don't see it on here.
Or is it Enoche? Isn't that how it's spelled?
I do not. Quite frankly, I've not heard of that.
Enoch?
Enoch?
Yeah.
The book
Enoch,
of...
I pronounce it differently.
Okay.
Enoch. Knock or Nick?
Knock.
Knock. That's what I thought.
It's not even listed in the Apocrypha, to be honest with you. So there is such a thing called the Book of Enoch. And it supposedly then, Enoch being, let me see if I can remember how that goes. Enoch is after Cain and Abel.
Right.
So he's like a grandson of Adam and Eve, and then the great-grandfather of Noah. Okay?
Okay.
The difference between these books and what does everybody understand what I'm saying when I mention the Apocrypha? You've heard that term before?
I
No.
have not.
Some have not?
I
No.
have.
No.
Okay. Of course, we have 66 books in the Bible, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. And they were kind of selected over a period of hundreds of years. And to be selected, the book had to be considered, first of all, authentic and true, obviously. Divinely inspired.
Divinely and what?
Divinely inspired. That is, the books were written by God using human authors. That they were truthful and that they were divinely inspired, and also that they were corroborated. So over time, the books that we now know to be in the Bible met all of those tests.
Okay.
Now, there are some books that meet some of those tests, but not other parts of them. And this is what we would call the books of the Apocrypha. And the word itself means doubtful, which is why they weren't included in the Bible. It was because for some reason there was some doubt about them and about their authenticity and about whether they were divinely inspired or not.
So is the book of Josephus in that group?
No. I was just looking at the books of the Apocrypha here. And I can tell you, let me see. Let me just go ahead and share screen here. That'd be easier to do it this way. Okay, can you see that graphic right there in the center then?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can't read it, but I can see it.
Now let me try it.
Yes.
Let's try that.
Oh, that's all
Oh,
better.
yes.
Okay. So the books of the Apocrypha are considered the two books of Esdras, then Tobit,
Mhm.
Judith, Wisdom, Baruch, First and Second Maccabees. And the church's position on these books is that they are helpful. They can be used for reading and further study and inspiration, but they are not divinely inspired and not authenticated and not considered then to be the Word of God.
Okay. Okay.
So other books might fall into that category. I don't know about the Book of Enoch. I was just, when you mentioned that, I was just looking at it, and a couple of very minor sects, SECTS, do consider it to be divinely inspired. Most of Christendom does not.
Okay.
So, again, the idea here is that a book has to meet certain qualifications to be considered divinely inspired. And we're not going to add any more books to the Bible.
True. Okay.
Go to Deuteronomy 4. Verse 2. And I guess we can stop screen sharing now.
Deuteronomy 4.
And somebody, when you get there,
Okay. Oh, okay. 4:2.
yeah, go ahead. Somebody read it when you get there.
Okay. Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command.
Okay, and we see essentially the same thing, even though you don't have to turn to it. At the very end of Revelation, last chapter, last verses of Revelation, I warn anyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book, if anyone adds anything to them, God will add to him the plagues described in this book. And if anyone takes away from this book of prophecy, God will take away from him his share in the tree of life in the holy city. So we see in the Old Testament and the New Testament that the Bible, as we understand it, is closed.
Okay. Okay.
And again, now you can read those books to get a better sense of what was going on, to help perhaps interpret interpret scripture, but you've got to be careful. For example, I know there is a Gospel of Thomas supposedly running around out there that talks about, in some places, the childhood of Jesus. Now, I would have to look up this story to verify it, but supposedly there's a story when Jesus was a child where something happened and he got angry and he killed some birds or something that were disturbing him or something like that. It's an interesting story, but again, there's no eyewitness testimony to corroborate it. There's no divine inspiration. So this Gospel of Thomas, whatever it is, and we don't even know if Thomas wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
So because of all those question marks, it's just not considered part of the Bible.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
which is really a very fascinating thing to think about, is how the Bible came into being. I've got a nice book here on the history of Christianity that talks a little bit about that. Of course, this book is so old now, it's pretty much history itself. Spreading the good news. Well, I'd have to look for it and. Oh, here it is. How the New Testament has come down to us. Okay. All right. So why are some books considered and others not? Well, the ones that are in the New Testament. First of all, we have physical evidence of them. We have the actual manuscripts. This here, the earliest surviving fragment of the New Testament is a papyrus containing parts of John in the original Greek that dates to about AD 130, which was probably not that much after he wrote it. Let's see. Okay, here it gives a timeline. The New Testament in the year AD 200 consisted of the 4 Gospels, the book of Acts, all of Paul's epistles, James, 1st and 2nd John, Jude, Revelation. And so as early as AD 200, those books were already accepted as part of the biblical canon. And then later comes by 400, you've got Hebrews, then 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. So basically in between the time period of 200 to 400 AD, the Bible, the New Testament came to existence. Remember, we already had the Old Testament. Jesus was reading from the Old Testament. They also put down in here, and I wish I could show this to you because it is kind of neat, a book called The Shepherd of Hermas was a book that was considered. It says to be used in private, but not in public or for worship. The Letter of Barnabas, the Acts of Peter, the Revelation of Peter. So certainly if we had Peter who had written something, and it could be, that would be helpful to us. But in that case, those books, they just don't know if it was him or not. They don't know where it came from. And because they can't authenticate it, they can't consider it part of the Bible canon. That's probably more than you wanted to know.
Very interesting.
What's interesting, when you think about it, excuse me, stand by. Okay, when you think about it, what books have come after, have been written since the time period of the Bible that are considered to be sacred by some people?
Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon and all the books associated with it. The Pearl of Great, what is it? The Pearl of Great Wisdom?
I want to say that.
The Book of Mormon, the Pearl, and the D&C. I can't remember the exact name of it. Something in Covenant. The Mormons have 4 sacred books. What else?
Well, there's Quran.
The obvious one is the Quran, which was written 500, 600, 700 years after the Bible, and mentions Jesus, of course. So, what if we consider the Bible? Well, let's go to Luke 1. Can somebody read Luke 1, 1-4?
Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught.
Okay. Who is Theophilus, by the way?
No.
I don't know. I do not know.
It could be a real person. We're not sure. But the word itself is a combination meaning theo, of God, and the phileo, love. So lover of God. So it could refer to somebody with that actual name, or it could be the more generic to people who love God. So, but basically, what is Luke saying here? I went back, I investigated the evidence. Remember, Luke was not a disciple, and he was not an apostle. He wasn't around for any of it. But he went back to check out everything he'd heard. What was his profession? Do you remember?
His physician.
He was a doctor. So he was very careful, making a scientific inquiry. He says, therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed to me to be good to write down an orderly account of what happened. He's going back and investigating these stories he heard. And
so
basically, this is his report. It's his book
So
report.
how much later was that than when the actions occurred?
Luke was written about 60 AD, so about 30 years after Jesus, well, less than 30 years after Jesus died.
Oh, so that's pretty.
Yeah, we're not talking about going back 100 years.
Okay.
And so many of the people would still have been alive.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now go to 2 Peter. This to me is even more convincing. 2 Peter.
I'm having trouble seeing this.
2 Peter 1, verse 16. 2 Peter 1, 16.
2 Peter 1.
Now, Peter is writing here about the same time as Luke. Yeah, maybe a few years later. So, all right, somebody read 2 Peter 1:16.
For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty.
We saw it. We were there. We experienced it. Peter, James, John, Matthew, all of them were there. Peter and James and John were up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. They saw all this stuff. And to me, it's statements like that that should give us so much comfort and confidence in the Bible. And to me, this is the greatest flaw in the books that came after the Bible. Who's the only eyewitness to the Book of Mormon?
The dude with the plates.
Joseph Smith, the only guy, the one guy who supposedly had this revelation from God. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else experienced it. Just him. And it's so interesting to me, if you go back and look at the history of the Mormons, how did they end up in Utah?
Wasn't that by accident?
Well, they ended up there because they got kicked out of every decent town they were ever in.
But also, was that where they were headed, or?
Oh, well, they just went there because they had nowhere else to go.
Okay, I thought it was something else.
Who is the only eyewitness to the Quran?
Muhammad.
That's it. One guy. It's the exact same story.
But then the people that wrote the Quran actually were reinterpret or writing what somebody told them that Muhammad said. It
Well,
wasn't.
Muhammad was supposedly illiterate, so he supposedly had this revelation from God and had to get somebody to write it down for him.
Today's your birthday.
So, is it the dog's birthday today?
Yeah, that's what I said. It's a birthday. I forgot it.
Happy birthday, Casey.
She just went away. She wants to do something else. I don't know.
How old is she today?
10.
She's getting up.
10.
She's getting up there.
What?
I
So
think
we should be filled with confidence and hope in the veracity, the truthfulness of the scriptures, because the people that wrote it were there and experienced these things.
I think that what starts at 19 is kind of interesting too. It talks about the prophets and how that wasn't the prophet's own interpretation. It didn't have its origin in humans, but prophets spoke from God.
We have the verse 19, we have the word of the prophets made more certain. In other words, it just all fits together. The Bible does not contradict itself. It's all part of the same story. And basically what came after was just confirmation of what the prophets said earlier. And you got to remember, Peter saw Elijah and Moses.
I've always wondered how he knew that it was Elijah and Moses.
I would imagine that that's one of those things where God just kind of opened his mind to that, I would assume. God somehow spoke to him and communicated that to him, or
It
Jesus.
wasn't the way humans know who that was.
Right.
It was,
It was divinely communicated would be my guess on that. So we do believe that the Bible is divinely inspired, written by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, as communicated to, I can't remember the exact number, 35 or 40 different authors over a period of thousands of years. Now, I have heard reference, and I'll leave these to our former Catholics, of a Catholic Bible. Now, what's the difference between the Catholic Bible and the Protestant Bible?
Well, I think the only thing I remember, because we didn't get to study the Bible, we were just, parts of it were part of the Mass, and I think that was our exposure. But
there
I
are
think
two additional
change
books.
was frowned
There's
upon,
different books.
wasn't it?
What was frowned upon?
the King James version, but there was,
Yes.
for some
We want-
reason, we weren't supposed to read the King James
No.
version.
No.
So, but I don't know what version.
But there's extra books in the Catholic Bible.
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking there, Linda. That
Oh,
there's
what
a
are those? I have to find out. I don't know.
difference between.
Well, I figured you guys would know. Did they not let you read the Bible?
No,
Really?
I didn't read the Bible.
there
Weren't
was
given a
the
Bible?
epistle, the
You- you were
epistle, and the something else. Here's my old missal. See, well worn. Can't read it anymore. And so the mass had the different sections, and each mass for each day had an epistle, which was a piece of the Bible. And what was the other part?
Gospel.
Then the gospel. And so that was our exposure.
And catechism.
It says here that the Catholics recognize 73 books
Wow.
in the Bible as opposed to the 66 books.
Okay, yeah, because they've got. I just
So they
do.
do recognize some of the books of the Apocrypha,
Mm-hmm.
including Tobit, Judith, First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Wisdom, Sirach, Baruch, and some additions to Esther and Daniel.
Yep.
So that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's it. It's the 7. Basically, it's the 7 additional books of the Apocrypha.
Interesting.
Mm.
Susan, were you telling me that St. Joe's is now having a Bible study class?
If I remember right, a few years ago when I was still getting the newspaper, they were talking about a Bible study there, and I thought, why didn't you do that a couple 100 years ago? You might have more Catholics.
I don't think you have to worry about them running out of Catholics anytime soon.
No, they're all guilted into doing that.
They're making them the old-fashioned way.
Well, but they're diminishing the same as every other denomination. You know,
I have never known the Catholics to be in a decline in that sense. I know a lot of the other mainline Protestant churches are.
well, they were, but not to the same proportion. But
Very
my
strong
friends,
in South America and
yeah,
in Hispanic countries, I know.
yeah.
I was just looking at that not too long ago. Christopher Columbus was really the first missionary to the Americas. He was a devout Catholic. He's the one that kind of
Spain, yeah.
planted the seed.
We should all be speaking Spanish.
We may be before long.
Yeah,
Or
some
Chinese.
would have it that
or
way.
something. So yeah, it's just that the Catholics add the extra, seven of the 11 books of the Apocrypha they add. So
Well, didn't King James just kind of cut the Bible out, the parts that he didn't like? When
No,
Or he thought they were relevant.
I have heard of people doing that. I didn't know that it was directly related to King James. That Bible, by the way, dates to 1611.
I always heard that he just ordered a translation into English, which was not available, or at least there was very little.
The first English translation was by, or one of the first attempts was by a guy named William Tyndale. Have you ever heard of the Tyndale Bible?
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
He was one of the first persons to attempt to translate the Bible into English. Remember, because at that time it was only in
German.
And that first attempt was in the hundreds. And the first English translation, and for his work, he was branded as a heretic and put to death.
Oh, okay.
They didn't want us to know anything.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out when he was killed. 1536. He was only 42 years old. I'm trying to
Pretty
find
young.
out about his death. So, yeah, the Catholics were pretty serious about keeping a lid on things back in the day. And Tyndall kind of paid the price for that. As Martin Luther would have if they could have found him and gotten to him.
Yeah.
They were sort of like the parent that says, do it because I said so. You know,
All right, so why would the Catholics not want the Bible translated into the vernacular?
they did not want you to be able to interpret it for yourself, and they would lose control of your.
Mm-hmm.
They were afraid you would misinterpret. They wanted to be in control of the interpretation and the understanding.
Right.
It was all about power.
Mm-hmm.
Power and control. Yeah.
So why, with so many Bibles and translations and commentaries, don't we still have the same problem of people misinterpreting the Bible?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, but they can't control us anymore.
So
Not
it's,
for trying.
Information is available.
Because you're always seeing somebody's version of the Bible coming out.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there are so many different versions and translations. And
It's unreal.
have you ever heard of, by the way, have you ever heard of this, the Jesus Seminar?
No?
No.
I'm not sure it's still going. But you talk about, I guess it's not going anymore. It says it was a group of 50 biblical scholars and 100 laymen founded in 1985 to go back and look at the Bible and study it and try to come up with definitive interpretation of it. So that's what these guys did. The
it happen?
problem, and do you know how they decided this?
How?
They would read the Bible, and there is this group of 100 guys or whatever, and then they'd start discussing it, and they'd say, okay, this is what we're going to decide about this. And then they had white beads and black beads, and they'd throw them in a bowl. White if you agreed, black if you...
Oh my gosh.
That's how they came up with it.
Oh my gosh.
And I can show you this picture of it. Yeah. But anyway, they came up with the goofiest. This is what happens when you sit around and try to interpret the Bible like this, almost by committee. I'm looking at some of their findings here. It's called The Search for the Historical Jesus. Let's see. Oh yeah, they had 4 beads: red, pink, gray, and black. Oh boy.
No white ones?
Among their findings, he had a human father whose name may not have been Joseph. He was born in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. He was.
Did they give reasons for their?
This was all consensus. This was them reading the Bible and essentially coming to a consensus on what it said. He did not walk on water, feed the multitude with loaves and fishes, change water into wine, or raise Lazarus from the dead. He was executed as a public nuisance, not claiming to be the Son of God.
Knock it off.
The empty tomb is a fiction according to them. Jesus was not raised bodily from the dead. Belief in the resurrection is based on the visionary experiences of Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene.
So these these 100 fellas, you think they were Christians?
Supposedly biblical scholars, Old Testament scholars, New Testament scholars. Yeah, 50 critical biblical scholars and 100 laymen.
Well,
Now, why would you believe that more than you would believe the Bible? Is what I don't understand.
well, how can you, this many years later, make a decision as to whether you might believe it or not believe it? But how can you make a decision like that this didn't happen, but that did, or that didn't happen?
But people are still doing
What's their
that.
criteria?
People do that every day, though.
Or-
People will look at the Bible and say, okay, well, I believe this about Jesus, but I don't believe that about him.
So
Yeah,
they
but
pick
that's an individual pronouncement. Not
Yeah, all I'm saying is what they're doing is not anything different than anybody has ever done.
okay.
Is that looking at the Bible not as the inspired, infallible Word of God that we believe it to be, but rather more as a scientific and historical text open for study and argumentation.
Glad they didn't invite me.
Do you believe that the Bible is the inspired, infallible Word of God?
yes,
I do.
yes.
And do you believe that of all of it?
Well,
Yeah.
I think it might have started out that way, but it's been translated and translated and translated, and we're not sure that the translators always did a perfect job. So some things may be a little wonky.
We have to trust that there was divine guidance for the translators.
Yeah,
We talked about this Sunday about how they were, since writing was not a form of communication at that point in time, they had to remember it, and they were schooled to remember every word the way that they were told until they could get it down in writing.
There are at least 52 English translations of the Bible.
and they're
Yeah.
all similar, but there are some
Similar, but
deviations.
there are some mostly linguistic, and
Yeah.
so and there's of course how many languages has the Bible been printed in? So,
Yeah.
but again, to go back to that question, do you essentially believe that the Bible, in its totality, is the inspired, inerrant, infallible Word of God Himself? That God is actually speaking through this.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Okay. Not all Christians can say that. Go, for example, to one of my favorites, Ephesians 5:22. What does that say?
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
Wives, summon yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord.
All right. If that's if you believe this is the divinely inspired, infallible Word of God, then you believe that, then, right?
Okay, say that again.
Wives, submit to your husbands as to the
Oh.
Lord.
Well, I think there was a little misunderstanding when that one was translated.
See?
I don't think it was probably a misunderstanding. That's just the way it was, and we've
Okay.
decided that we want to change our understanding today in
Yes.
today's society, because the word is the word is the word, but we choose to make our own understandings as time goes on.
The way I always think of this and explain it in terms of premarital counseling or marital counseling or whatever, is you also have to read it in light of verse 25.
Husband, love your wives.
Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for them.
Yep.
If I am loving my wife sacrificially, and I am willing to give up my very life for her and sacrifice for her, then my wife understands that and sees that, and then is more willing to submit to my authority when decisions have to be made. Not what to eat for dinner, or, what are we going to go do? What movie do you want to see? But in a very real sense, we've kind of come to this modern understanding of a marriage as a democracy. The problem is, if you go by a vote, then every vote could be 1-to-1. How do you break the tie?
With God.
Well, and that's the point. The
As
whole point
yeah,
of this section is not that the husband is the head of the wife, or the wife is in charge of the husband. The point of it is Christ is over all. And Christ should be at the head of, when Christ is at the head of the relationship, the husband loves the wife as he loves God and is willing to sacrifice for her. And then the wife, knowing that, is willing then to submit to the husband.
In a perfect world.
But that's the basis, that should be the basis for the relationship.
Right.
Okay. Now go ahead, here's another one. Just go ahead one chapter. Ephesians 6:5.
Servants.
Well, mine doesn't say servants.
Mine says servants be obedient
Slaves.
to the flesh with fear and trembling.
Does anybody say something different?
slaves.
Slaves.
Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ.
Mine is servants be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the singleness of your heart unto Christ.
And this is a part other people have problems with. How could a loving God be telling people, slaves, obey your masters? So is this a part of the Bible you have trouble with?
Trouble with that.
And really, that's even a better question to ask, is what parts of the Bible do you have trouble with? Not trouble in the sense of obeying, but trouble in the sense of, boy, should that really be in there? For example, if you go back to the book of Joshua, and what's going on in the book of Joshua? Remember, Moses is dead. Joshua is leading the people into the promised land, but the problem is what? Who's already in the promised land?
Canaanites.
A bunch of foreigners, right? A bunch of pagans. And what does God tell Joshua to do? Kill them all. Men, women, and children. Do you have a problem with that?
No, that doesn't sound good.
See, Susan has a problem with it because she just left.
No, let the dog in. The dog decided
Was master.
she found out it's her birthday, so she thinks she can do whatever she wants.
So we say we believe in the Bible as the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of God. But there's these trouble sections that give us problems. What do you think about that in Joshua where God says that?
They were inhabiting the promised land, right?
Right?
And they weren't, did they even have a religion at all?
Probably.
Mostly more than one God, right?
Well, there are some bad religions going on, including ones that included human and child sacrifice.
Yeah. So he had to clean out the promised land so that he could bring the Israelites there. So
Right?
what are you supposed to do?
But doesn't it say in the Bible that God is love?
I mean, it says God is a lot of.
Jesus loves the little children.
Yeah, it says God is a lot of things. The Bible does.
Let me check this. Go to 1 Samuel 15:3. Actually, 2 and 3.
2 and 3. 1 Samuel 15, 2 and 3.
This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys.
As a matter of fact, Saul got in trouble for not doing that in some occasions and keeping some of the stuff as plunder. As a matter of fact, it's later in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So, boy, that sure doesn't sound like that God I read about in the New Testament where God loves everybody and bring the little children unto me, and here he's wiping them out. What do you think about that?
I think he's a just God.
You have a problem with God as he has revealed himself in that section of Scripture.
That was the Old Testament God that was mad all the time.
But it's the same God. God does not change.
We're not going to go through that because I heard that someplace else. I'm not the only person that thinks that way.
Isn't it a warning that there are dire consequences for disobeying God?
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course.
Look what he did. All the people that were all of the Israelites, how many people did he kill and like just make a big sinkhole? And they fell into because they weren't listening to him.
I want to go back to this idea, though. You said there's other people that think this, that there's
I've never heard of that.
an Old Testament
God. I know we had a whole lesson on it, Brad. We had a whole lesson one night on the good things in the Old Testament and the bad things in the New Testament, that he's still the same God, but he created a new covenant when Christ was born.
That's true. But he didn't change. He just changed the nature of the relationship between us.
He just started taking Prozac. He was not.
I tell you what. Let's do.
Okay.
I'm going to give you homework for next time.
I'm not going to like this. I know. I'm not.
I want you to think of a section of the Bible that gives you trouble.
It gives us what? Trouble?
Gives you trouble, and if you could, like Thomas Jefferson did with his Bible, if you could cut it out, what part would it be?
Gosh.
Maybe it's where Paul talks about women should be silent.
We don't want to talk about that. We did that one already.
We wouldn't have had much of a discussion tonight if that was the case.
Yeah, we wouldn't. We wouldn't have much to say. But that's in church. That's in worship.
Listening to you like good silent women.
You do realize that there are plenty of churches, and as a matter of fact, I came from one that do not accept women preachers
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a hard thing to find.
on their understanding of the Bible.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so we're supposed to go Old Testament and New Testament
Doesn't
the whole
matter.
time.
It can be anywhere.
Okay.
What's the part of the Bible that gives you the most, that you have the most trouble with? And not in terms of understanding it, but I guess what I'm saying is in terms of accepting.
Because it seems so outdated.
It could be outdated. It could be whatever.
Ridiculous.
Contradictory. Could be. You don't think
That's
it's right.
interesting. Never thought about carving anything away from the Bible.
I was going to
But
take
people,
it.
but people do that. People do that all the time.
I just can't. I can't fathom doing that. I can't.
There are some people
can't do
who
that.
can look at the Bible with a straight face and say, "There's nothing in there that condemns homosexuality."
I know there are, and I can show them the things that does condemn them.
So
Depends on how you want to look at it. Depends on what you want to read.
essentially what they're doing is cutting those parts out of their Bible.
Yep. For their sake.
They're just choosing to ignore it.
Mhm.
So everybody knows what we're doing then, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I got a lot of reading to do.
No, I mean, surely.
Well, you all are more familiar with the Bible than I am, so if I want to find some good sections, I'm going to have to read a lot.
Well, just bring up some topics, and you can put that in and Google that in the Bible, and if there's something that you are, and you could read about it and go back and forth with that. I do that a lot.
All right.
Hey,
Thanks, Brad.
Somebody write this down so we know what we're doing next week.
I don't think we'll forget it.
All right.
yeah, I wrote it.
Okay.
Oh.
Here, I have a question. Is anybody going to speak to me at church on Sunday?
Probably
I
not.
won't be there. I don't do Mother's
I
Day.
won't be there.
Sorry. I don't do Mother's Day. I just don't do it. Can't do it.
Why would people not speak to you?
For bringing this up in the first place.
Oh, I see.
Oh no, I if I was there, I would.
Oh, you'd have to get something a whole lot worse than this.
Yeah.